Okay, so on the next video, we're going to take a look at wavy lines and floating bars. So you can see that I've been working with this little bit of yellow here. And I'm just beating that in as we go. And now, if I want to add a wavy line, I just take a small length of whatever color I want to use, and I put that in with a decent sized tail in there. And you can see I'm not going all the way across. I'm just going to put a line, a little wavy line right in the middle. Then I bring one side of this in. I'll clip that off. And then bring the other side in. Now, if you want to use a splice on your wavy line here, I've got these two warp threads right here that have nothing underneath them. So that can be a splice zone. And if you're not sure what I'm talking about in a splice zone, go watch the splicing video. I'm going to unply these and put half of each into that little splice zone of these two threads. So basically I've made one circle, or one pass, or sorry, not pass, sequence across with the green yarn to make what looks right now like a solid line of that green. But here's the trick. Because of the way that the weft is going over and under the warp threads, when I pack down on top of this, that straight line turns into a little bit of a squiggle. And so that is a wavy line. And once you've got a little bit of yarn over the top of your wavy line, you can just pull those ends, clip them right close to the surface, and there you have a wavy line. I'll do one more just so you can see. The beauty of these little lines is that you can put them at various places, little stepped off places across. So this time I just cut a little length of thread instead of having the bobbin. I put it behind, so here's my first pick in sequence. And to create a solid line, remember that you need to do a sequence. One trip across makes dots. It takes two trips across, back and forth, to create a line. And again, I'm leaving two warp threads with nothing underneath them so that I can use that area to splice in. And I'm just unplying my two ends, one from each piece here. Put it under those two warp threads. And half of this guy, and under those two warp threads. You can always tell that you've done a splice correctly if you have a pair of tails coming out of each of those gaps on either side of the splice zone. Change the shed, beat that in, and now I can move my yellow back across. So this is just a very quick and simple way to create lines or steps or some kind of pattern or design across your tapestry without having to bring in a whole other bobbin. It's a really great way to introduce color. So if I were going to move to the green color next, for example, this would be a great way to introduce it before I get to that point. And the last step then, when I have some more over the top, is to just snip those off. Before we stop with the wavy lines, I'm also going to show you a floating bar, which is very, very similar. A floating bar is just like a bigger wavy line. So on this one, I'm going to pigtail this end out the back, and a pigtail just means moving it underneath the working edge warp thread. And by putting it underneath, you create a little bit of friction right there, and it's enough to hold that yarn into place on the back end. And we can weave it in later or just leave it on the back of the tapestry. So for my floating bar, let's say I'm going to go, oh, I don't know, how about 6 times across? So there's the third one. If you want to avoid getting into a mixed shed situation, you're always going to pick an even number. And again, that's because you want to get one whole set in your up shed and one whole set in your down shed. So you don't necessarily need to count, but whichever side I started on is the side I'm also going to end on. So I started on my left, I'm going to end on my left, cut my tail. And I'm going to pigtail this again. Because I'm one thread short of the end of the design to pigtail, I go underneath both of those outside warp threads, through the back and down. I've got my nice little bubble, beat it in, and there is my floating bar. To build in around the floating bar now, I just take the yellow across and build until I reach the top of it. And I would do the same from the opposite side. And once I reach the top, then I can go all the way across. So it'll be one more after this. And now on this next pass, you can see where the yellow and the green are even right there. And on the next pass, I'm going to be able to go all the way across. To fill in completely, I would have to do the same thing from the opposite side over here. But you can see with that much how I've got my wavy lines and my floating bar.